The sound of dirt hitting a casket is supposed to be the most heartbreaking sound in the world. But for Andrew Sterling, the real devastation didn't come from the grave. It came from the man standing beside her. At 2:00 p.m., she buried her mother. At 2:05 p.m., her husband handed her an envelope that would destroy her life. He left her there, pregnant, broke, and alone in the rain. But what he didn't know was that the poor woman in that casket had just left Andrew a secret inheritance worth $500 million. And by the time he finds out, it will be too late for mercy. This is the story of the ultimate betrayal and the most satisfying revenge you will ever hear. The rain over the Cypress Hills Cemetery in Seattle wasn't a drizzle. It was a punishment. It fell in icy sheets, turning the fresh mound of earth over Margaret Vance's grave into a slurry of mud. Andrew Sterling stood trembling under a flimsy black umbrella. Her shoes, old flats that had seen better days, were sinking into the wet grass. She was 6 months pregnant, and the weight of her belly felt heavier today, as if her unborn daughter could feel the sorrow radiating through her body. "Are we done yet?" The voice beside her was sharp, impatient, and devoid of any warmth. Mark Sterling checked his Rolex Submariner for the 3rd time in 5 minutes. He shifted his weight, trying to keep the mud off his Italian leather loafers. "Mark, please," Andrew whispered, her voice cracking. "It hasn't even been 10 minutes since the priest left. I need a moment with Mom." Mark sighed, a loud, theatrical exhale that puffed white in the cold air. "Andrew, look around. There's no one here. Just us and the gravedigger waiting for us to leave so he can finish the job. Your mother is gone. Standing here getting pneumonia isn't going to bring her back." Andrew looked down at the simple wooden cross. She couldn't afford a headstone yet. Her mother, Margaret, had died of a sudden stroke, leaving behind a small, cluttered apartment and a mountain of unpaid medical bills. Or so Andrew thought. Margaret had been eccentric, living quietly, often wearing thrift store clothes and clipping coupons. Mark had always despised her. He called her a leech and a burden. "I just want to say goodbye," Andrew sobbed softly. "You've said it," Mark snapped. He turned his body fully toward her, his face hard. He was a handsome man, sharp jawline, piercing blue eyes, the kind of face that closed deals in boardrooms. But right now, he looked like a stranger. "Actually, since we're here, there's no good time to do this, so I'm just going to rip the Band-Aid off." Andrew wiped her eyes, confused. "Do what?" Mark reached into the inner pocket of his dry-cleaned trench coat. He pulled out a thick, manila envelope. It wasn't a sympathy card. He shoved it into her free hand. "What is this?" Andrew asked, the paper feeling damp under her fingers. "Divorce papers," Mark said, calmly. The way he said it was terrifyingly casual, as if he were ordering coffee. "I've signed my portion. My lawyer, James P. Morgan, will be in touch about the logistics. But I want you out of the penthouse by tomorrow evening." The world stopped. The rain seemed to freeze in mid-air. "Mark? What?" Andrew gasped, clutching her stomach. I'm pregnant with your child. My mother just died. We are burying her right now." "I know the timing isn't ideal," Mark said, adjusting his cuffs. "But I can't do this anymore, Andrew. I'm on the verge of making partner at Slightly & Associates. I need a wife who fits that life. A wife who is an asset, not a liability." "A liability!" Andrew cried out, dropping the umbrella. The rain instantly soaked her hair, plastering it to her pale face. "I have supported you for 5 years. I worked 2 jobs while you finished law school. I paid for this suit you're wearing." "And I appreciate that," Mark said coldly. "But we've outgrown each other. Look at you, Andrew. You're a mouse. You wear rags. You have no ambition. And frankly, I don't want to be tied to your family's poverty anymore. I don't want our child raised with that failure mindset." "There is someone else, isn't there?" Andrew asked, her intuition screaming. Mark paused. A cruel smirk tugged at the corner of his mouth. "Sarah. She's the daughter of the senior partner. She gets me, Andrew. She understands the world I live in." Sarah, the woman Mark had hired as a consultant 3 months ago. The woman who smiled too much at him at the Christmas party. "You're leaving me and your unborn son for your boss's daughter?" "I'm securing my future," Mark corrected. "I've left you $5,000 in the joint account. Consider it severance. Use it to find a place. Maybe go back to that small town you came from. It suits you better." He turned around and began walking toward his silver BMW X5, parked on the asphalt path. "Mark, you can't leave me here." Andrew screamed, the wind tearing the sound from her throat. "I don't have a car! Mark!" He didn't look back. He got into the luxury SUV, the engine roared to life, and he drove away, splashing muddy water onto the grass as he sped toward the exit. Andrew fell to her knees in the mud. She clutched the envelope to her chest, wailing. She had lost her mother and her husband in the span of 24 hours. She was alone, cold, and carrying a life she no longer knew how to support. She stayed there for what felt like hours, shivering so violently her teeth rattled. She didn't hear the crunch of tires on gravel until the car was right behind her. It wasn't Mark coming back. It was a vintage, black Rolls-Royce Phantom. A chauffeur stepped out with a large black umbrella, followed by an older man in an impeccable charcoal suit. He had silver hair, wire-rimmed glasses, and carried a leather briefcase that looked older than Andrew. He walked over to where Andrew was kneeling in the mud. He didn't say a word at first. He simply held the umbrella over her, shielding her from the downpour. "Mrs. Sterling?" the man asked. His voice was deep, gravelly, and kind. Andrew looked up, her mascara running down her cheeks. Who are you?" "My name is Harrison Thorne," the man said. "I was your mother's personal attorney for the last 40 years. Andrew blinked, wiping rain from her eyes. "My mother didn't have an attorney. She worked at a bakery. She barely had enough money for rent." Harrison Thorne smiled, a small, secretive smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. He offered her a hand to help her up. "That, my dear, was exactly what Margaret wanted everyone to believe. Please come into the car. We have a lot to discuss, and you shouldn't be out in this cold. The heir to the Vance dynasty simply cannot catch a cold." The interior of the Rolls-Royce smelled of old leather and expensive scotch. The heating was on, wrapping Andrew in a cocoon of warmth that made her skin prickle. She sat huddled in the back seat, a thick wool blanket draped over her shoulders, courtesy of the chauffeur, whose name was Alfred. Harrison Thorne sat across from her, opening a silver thermos. He poured steaming tea into a cup and handed it to her. "Drink," he commanded gently. "Shock is a dangerous thing for a woman in your condition." Andrew took the cup with trembling hands. "Mr. Thorne, I don't understand. Is this a mistake? My mother, she clipped coupons. We ate pasta with butter for weeks when the electric bill was too high." "Why do you have a Rolls-Royce?" Harrison sighed, looking out the window as the car glided smoothly toward downtown Seattle. "Margaret Vance was a woman of extreme discipline. Andrew, do you know what your grandfather did?" "He was a farmer, wasn't he? Somewhere in Texas?" "He was," Harrison nodded. "But in 1974 he found oil, a lot of it. And then He invested that money into a little start-up technology firm in California that no one believed in. Margaret inherited all of it when she was 20. Andrew stared at him. "Because of your father," Harrison said softly. "Your father married Margaret for her money. He spent millions in 3 years, cheated on her, and nearly bankrupted the estate before he died in that car accident. Margaret was terrified that you would grow up to be like him, or that you would attract men who only wanted your wealth." Andrew felt a lump form in her throat. She thought of Mark. "I can't be tied to a sinking ship." "She wanted you to find a man who loved you for you, Andrew, not for the Vance name. She wanted you to learn the value of $1, of hard work, of kindness." Harrison paused, his eyes narrowing slightly behind his glasses. "She was watching your husband very closely, you know." "She knew?" Andrew whispered. "She knew he was bad?" "She had him investigated 3 years ago," Harrison revealed. "She knew about his gambling debts in Vegas. She knew about his ambition. And she suspected the infidelity long before you did. She was waiting for you to see it." Andrew looked down at the muddy envelope, still clutched in her hand. "I saw it today. He divorced me at her grave." Harrison's face darkened. A flash of genuine anger crossed his features. "He did what?" "He left me," Andrew said, her voice hollow. "He said I was a liability. He said I was poverty-stricken and he needed someone with status." Harrison stared at her for a long moment, and then, surprisingly, he let out a low, dry chuckle. It wasn't a laugh of amusement. It was the laugh of a general who had just been handed the enemy's battle plans. "Status," Harrison repeated, tasting the word like sour wine. "Mr. Sterling is a junior partner at a law firm that bills by the hour. He thinks that is status." Harrison placed his briefcase on his lap and clicked the gold latches open. He pulled out a thick document bound in blue velvet. He opened the document. "Margaret Vance left you everything. The portfolio includes the mineral rights in West Texas, a controlling interest in a pharmaceutical company in Zurich, real estate in London, Tokyo, and New York, and a liquid cash trust." Andrew felt lightheaded. "How much? How much is it worth?" Harrison looked her dead in the eye. "After taxes, the current valuation of the Vance estate sits at approximately $520 million. Andrew dropped the teacup. It didn't break, but the hot liquid spilled onto the floor mats. She couldn't breathe. 500 million. "But," Harrison held up a finger, "there is a condition. Your mother knew you were soft-hearted, Andrew. She worried that if you inherited this money while married to a man like Mark, he would manipulate you into giving him control." Andrew looked at the divorce papers in her lap. Mark had just handed her the key to the fortune. By divorcing her, he had fulfilled the condition. He did it himself," Andrew whispered. "Precisely," Harrison said. "Technically, since he filed the papers before you claimed the inheritance, and since Washington is a community property state, but inheritances are generally separate, especially with this specific trust structure, he is entitled to exactly 0 cents of this money." Harrison leaned forward. "However, nobody knows this. To the world, Margaret Vance died poor. To Mark, you are a destitute single mother. If we file the acceptance of the inheritance publicly, he might try to contest the divorce, claim he wants you back just to get a settlement." Andrew's tears had dried. In their place, a cold, hard ember began to glow in her chest. She thought of Mark driving away. She thought of him calling her a liability. She thought of Sarah, the woman, taking her place. "He wants a divorce," Andrew said, her voice trembling, but this time with rage, not sadness. I'll give him a divorce. But I don't want him to know about the money. Not yet." Harrison smiled, and this time it was a predator's smile. "I was hoping you would say that. Silence is our greatest weapon. But you need a place to live." "The penthouse is in his name?" "Yes." "Good. Let him keep it. It has a mortgage, I assume?" "A huge one. He's obsessed with appearances." "Excellent." Harrison tapped a paper in the file. "I suggest we move you into the family estate. It's not in the city. It's in Medina." "Medina?" Andrew asked. That was where the tech billionaires lived. Gates, Bezos. "We have a house in Medina?" "You have a compound in Medina," Harrison corrected. "It has been empty for 10 years, maintained by staff, waiting for you. But first..." Harrison looked at her muddy dress, her worn shoes, her messy hair. "If we are going to go to war, Mrs. Sterling, or should I say, Ms. Vantor, we need to armor you up." Mark Sterling broke Andrew, but he has never met the woman who is about to take his place. Harrison picked up the car phone. "Alfred, take us to the Four Seasons, and call the personal shopper at Bergdorf's. We need a full wardrobe sent to the presidential suite. Maternity, but..." "Fierce." Andrew touched her stomach. "He said he wanted a future," she whispered to the rain streaking the window. "I'm going to buy his future." 3 days after the funeral, Andrew walked into the sleek, glass-walled offices of Slightly and Associates. She wore a grey woolen cardigan that was slightly too big, frayed jeans and sneakers. She looked exactly like what Mark wanted her to be, defeated, poor, and insignificant. The receptionist, a young woman with perfectly highlighted hair, looked at Andrew with barely concealed disdain. "Delivery goes to the service entrance in the back." "I'm here to see Mark Sterling," Andrew said softly, clutching her purse. "I'm his wife." The receptionist blinked, her eyes scanning Andrew's outfit. "Oh, the wife? Right. He's in conference room B. He said to send you straight in. He's in a hurry." Andrew walked down the corridor. She could feel the eyes of the paralegals and junior associates on her. They all knew. In a firm like this, gossip traveled faster than wire transfers. They knew Mark was dumping his pregnant wife for the boss's daughter. They probably had a betting pool on whether she would cry. She pushed open the heavy oak door. Mark was sitting at the head of a long mahogany table. Next to him sat a man who looked like a bulldog in a suit, James P. Morgan, his divorce lawyer. And sitting in the corner, looking at her phone, was Sarah. Sarah was blonde, beautiful, and wearing a dress that cost more than Andrew's old annual salary. When Andrew entered, Sarah didn't even stand up. She just smirked. "You're late," Mark said, not looking up from his papers. "I have a lunch meeting at 1. "I had to take the bus," Andrew lied. Her Rolls-Royce was actually parked 3 blocks away, with Alfred guarding it like a hawk. "Here is the settlement." James P. Morgan slid a document across the table. "As discussed, Mark provides a lump sum of $5,000. No alimony. No claim on his future earnings. You get full physical custody of the child, but Mark retains visitation rights at his discretion." "Visitation rights?" Andrew asked, her voice trembling slightly. "You want to see the child?" "Standard legal language," Mark said dismissively. "I doubt I'll have much time, what with the partnership track and our new life." He glanced at Sarah. "But it looks good on paper to have the option." It took every ounce of Andrew's strength not to lunge across the table. "It looks good on paper." That was all her child was to him. A clause, a footnote. "And if I sign this," Andrew said, "we are done? Completely?" "Irrevocably," James said. "The moment the judge stamps this, you are legal strangers." Andrew picked up the pen. Her hand hovered over the paper. "Mark," she said, looking him in the eye, Are you sure? Once I sign this, you can never come back, no matter what happens." Mark laughed. It was a cold, pitying sound. "Andrew, look at you, and look at me. Trust me, I'm not coming back. Just sign the papers so we can all move on." Sarah giggled in the corner. "Ideally before my lunch reservation, please." Andrew lowered the pen. She signed her name, Andrew Vance Sterling. She pushed the papers back. "I'm keeping my maiden name," she said quietly. "I don't want yours anymore." "Fine by me." Mark grabbed the papers, checking the signature. "James, file this immediately. Andrew, the check is in the mail. Good luck with whatever you do." He stood up, offered his arm to Sarah, and walked out of the room without a backward glance. He didn't ask how the baby was doing. He didn't ask where she was sleeping. He just walked out to his bright, shiny future. Andrew waited until the door clicked shut. Then she stood up. She smoothed her cardigan. Her posture changed. The slump vanished, replaced by a spine of steel. She walked out of the building, ignoring the receptionist. She walked 3 blocks to the waiting Rolls-Royce. Alfred opened the door. Harrison Thorne was waiting inside with a glass of sparkling cider. "Is it done?" he asked. "It's done," Andrew said, her voice icy. "He thinks I'm destitute. He thinks he won." Harrison clinked his glass against hers. "The most dangerous enemy, my dear, is the one you think is dead. Now let's go home." The car drove out of the city, crossing the long, floating bridge toward Medina. They passed gates of iron and gold, driveways hidden by massive cedar trees. Finally, they turned into a driveway that seemed to go on for miles. The Vance estate was not a house. It was a sanctuary, a modern fortress of glass, stone, and timber overlooking Lake Washington. It had 6 bedrooms, a library, a private dock, and a staff of 5 who had been sworn to absolute secrecy. As Andrew stepped out of the car, the head housekeeper, a matronly woman named Mrs. Higgins, bowed her head. "Welcome home, Miss Vance. We have prepared the nursery." Andrew walked through the house, her hand trailing over the imported marble surfaces. She stopped in the nursery. It was painted a soft cream, with a crib that looked like it belonged to royalty. She walked to the floor-to-ceiling window and looked out at the grey water of the lake. Somewhere across that water, in a cramped downtown apartment, Mark was celebrating his freedom. "Enjoy it, Mark," she whispered, her hand resting on her belly. "Enjoy your little victory, because when I'm done with you, you won't even have a name left to sign." 6 months later, Mark Sterling adjusted his tie in the mirror of the bathroom at Slightly and Associates. He looked tired. There were dark circles under his eyes that concealer couldn't quite hide. Life with Sarah wasn't the fairy tale he had imagined. It turned out that Sarah wasn't just high maintenance. She was a black hole of finances. She demanded weekly spa days, new cars, and vacations to St. Bart's. Mark was making good money, but he was bleeding cash just to keep up with her lifestyle. He was living paycheck to paycheck on a 6-figure salary. Worse, the promotion to senior partner hadn't happened yet. His father-in-law, the boss, kept dangling it like a carrot on a stick. "Just one more big client, Mark. Just bring in a whale, and the partnership is yours." Mark splashed water on his face. He needed a win. He needed a miracle. He walked back to his desk, where his assistant, a nervous young man named Greg, was waiting. "Mr. Sterling," Greg stammered, "you have a call on line 1. It's the Aurelius Group." Mark froze. The Aurelius Group. They were a ghost legend in the investment world, a private equity firm based in Zurich that had popped up out of nowhere 6 months ago. They were buying up distressed assets, tech startups, and real estate all over the Pacific Northwest. No one knew who the CEO was. They only knew that Aurelius had deeper pockets than God. Mark snatched the phone. "This is Mark Sterling." "Mr. Sterling," a crisp British voice answered. "This is Harrison Thorne. I represent the Aurelius Group." Mark's heart hammered. "Mr. Thorne, I've heard of you. What can I do for you?" "We are looking for local counsel in Seattle," Harrison said smoothly. "We are planning a hostile takeover of a shipping logistics company, and we need a lawyer who is aggressive. Someone who doesn't mind getting their hands dirty." "Your name came up." Mark puffed out his chest. "I'm your man, Mr. Thorne. Aggressive is my middle name." "Excellent. However, the Aurelius Group values privacy above all else. You will report directly to me. You will never meet the board of directors, and you will prioritize our cases above all other clients. In exchange, we are prepared to put you on a retainer of $50,000 a month, plus billable hours." 50,000. That was more than his base salary. It was enough to pay off his credit cards, buy Sarah the diamond necklace she was nagging him about, and finally secure the partnership. "I accept," Mark said, almost too quickly. "When do we start?" "Immediately," Harrison said. "I'm sending over the files now. Do not fail us, Mr. Sterling. The chairman of Aurelius is unforgiving." Mark hung up the phone and punched the air. "Yes!" He didn't know that 3 miles away, in the sun-drenched study of the Vance estate, Harrison Thorne put the phone down and looked at the woman sitting in the high-backed leather chair. Andrew looked nothing like the woman in the cemetery. The extra weight from the pregnancy was gone, replaced by a lean, athletic physique honed by a private trainer. Her hair, once a mousy brown, was now a rich, glossy chestnut, cut in a sharp, asymmetrical bob that screamed power. She wore a tailored white suit that cost more than Mark's car. In her arms, she held a 3-month-old baby girl with bright blue eyes. Victoria. "He took the bait?" Andrew asked, rocking Victoria gently. "Hook, line, and sinker," Harrison said, pouring himself a brandy. "He didn't even read the contract terms I sent over. He's desperate for cash." "Good," Andrew said. She walked over to the desk and looked at the file labeled Project Icarus. "What is the first assignment?" she asked. "The shipping company," Harrison said. "Technically, it's a conflict of interest. That shipping company is owned by one of his firm's oldest clients. If he takes the case to help us acquire it, he is betraying his own boss." Andrew smiled. It was a cold smile, sharp as a diamond. He said he wanted a wife who was an asset. "I'm going to make him the greatest liability his firm has ever seen. Let him take the case. Let him destroy his reputation to please us. And when he's burned all his bridges—" "We cut the rope," Harrison finished. Andrew looked down at Victoria. The baby cooed, reaching for Andrew's gold necklace. "He left us in the mud, Vicky," Andrew whispered to the baby. "Now, we're going to bury him in gold." The trap is set over the next 3 months. Mark Sterling worked like a dog. He missed dinners with Sarah. He missed firm outings. He was obsessed with pleasing the mysterious Aurelius Group. The money was intoxicating. The monthly checks cleared instantly. Mark bought a new Porsche. He moved Sarah into an even bigger penthouse. He felt invincible. He didn't realize that every case Harrison gave him was a trap. First, it was the conflict of interest with the shipping company. Mark found a loophole to screw over his firm's old client, handing the company to Aurelius on a silver platter. His boss was suspicious, but the fees Aurelius paid were so high that the firm looked the other way. Then, it was a real estate deal. Aurelius wanted to buy the building that housed Slightly and Associates. Harrison instructed Mark to find a clause in the firm's lease that would allow the landlord to hike the rent by 300%. "Why would I do that?" Mark had asked Harrison. "That's my office." "Because," Harrison had replied coldly. "If you don't, we will pull the retainer. And I imagine you've already spent next month's check?" Mark had swallowed hard. He had. He had bought Sarah a racehorse, a literal racehorse. So Mark did it. He legally maneuvered the paperwork so that his own law firm was facing eviction or bankruptcy, all to please a client he had never met. He was selling his soul, piece by piece. One rainy Tuesday in November, almost a year to the day of Margaret Vance's funeral, Mark received an invitation. It was a heavy, cream-colored card with gold embossing. The Aurelius Group Annual Gala, honoring our partners and friends' black tie. Only the Grand Ballroom, the Fairmont Hotel. "Finally," Mark said to Sarah, waving the invitation. "Finally I get to meet the chairman. I get to shake the hand of the man who made us rich." Sarah looked at the invitation, unimpressed. "About time. I need to wear something custom. I can't be seen in off-the-rack." "Buy whatever you want," Mark said, his eyes gleaming with greed. "After tonight, I'm going to ask for a position on the board. I'm the golden boy, Sarah. I'm untouchable." Mark didn't know that the chairman wasn't a man. He didn't know that the walls were closing in. And he certainly didn't know that the invite list included not just him, but his boss, his boss's partners, and every person he had betrayed to get there. It wasn't a party. It was an execution. And Andrew Sterling was ready to swing the axe. The Grand Ballroom of the Fairmont Hotel was a sea of black tuxedos and glittering diamonds. A string quartet played softly in the corner, drowned out by the murmur of Seattle's elite. Mark Sterling stood near the ice sculpture, swirling a glass of champagne. He felt like a god. He was wearing a new Armani tuxedo, custom-fitted. On his arm, Sarah wore a red dress that was cut aggressively low, designed to draw attention. "Look at this crowd," Mark whispered to Sarah. "That's the CEO of Amazon over there, and the governor. The Aurelius Group must be bigger than I thought." "Just make sure you introduce me to the chairman," Sarah said, checking her reflection in a spoon. "I want to ask if they have positions in their PR department. Daddy is being so stingy with my allowance lately." Speaking of Daddy, Mark stiffened. Walking toward them was Arthur Blackwood, the senior partner of Slightly & Associates, and Sarah's father. He did not look happy. His face was beet red, and he was marching with purpose. "Mark!" Arthur barked, ignoring his daughter. "What the hell are you doing here?" Mark blinked, putting on his best charming smile. "Arthur, I was invited by the Aurelius Group. I've been doing some consulting for them. I thought this might be a good networking opportunity for the firm." Arthur's eyes bulged. "Networking? For the firm? Are you insane? The Aurelius Group is the predator that just hostile took over our biggest shipping client. They are the ones who just jacked up the rent on our building. They are trying to bleed us dry." Mark's smile faltered. He felt a bead of cold sweat roll down his back. He knew that. He had drafted the paperwork for those deals, but he hadn't realized Arthur knew Aurelius was behind it. I wasn't aware of the specifics, Arthur," Mark lied. "I just handled some minor contract work." "Well, you better hope it was minor," Arthur hissed, "because I'm going to find out who is running this shadow company, and I'm going to sue them into the Stone Age. And if I find out anyone in my firm helped them—" He left the threat hanging in the air. Suddenly, the lights in the ballroom dimmed. A spotlight hit the stage. The chatter died down instantly. Harrison Thorne walked onto the stage. He looked distinguished, powerful, and utterly in control. "Ladies and gentlemen," Harrison's voice boomed over the speakers, "distinguished guests, victims." A ripple of nervous laughter went through the crowd. "Victims? Tonight," Harrison continued, is a night of revelation. For the past year, the Aurelius Group has been operating in the shadows. We have acquired assets. We have corrected market inefficiencies. And we have tested character. Harrison scanned the room. His eyes seemed to lock onto Mark for a split second. Many of you have wondered who is behind the Aurelius Group. Rumors have swirled. Is it a foreign prince? A tech algorithm? A faceless board of directors? Mark leaned forward, his heart pounding. Here it is. The big man. The truth is, Harrison said, stepping aside, the Aurelius Group was founded on a single principle. The true power doesn't roar, it waits. Please welcome the chairwoman and sole owner of the Aurelius Group, Ms. Andrew Vance. The heavy velvet curtains parted. Mark dropped his champagne glass. It shattered on the marble floor, the sound echoing in the silence. Walking out onto the stage was Andrew. But it wasn't the Andrew he knew. It wasn't the woman in the muddy funeral clothes. It wasn't the mouse who apologized for existing. This woman was a goddess. She wore a floor-length gown of midnight blue velvet that hugged every curve, shimmering under the lights like deep water. Around her neck sat a diamond necklace that was so large it looked heavy, the Star of the South, worth $12 million. Her dark hair was swept up in a regal chignon. Her makeup was flawless, highlighting eyes that burned with a cold, terrifying intelligence. She walked to the microphone. She didn't look nervous. She looked bored. "Andrew?" Mark wheezed. The room spun. That's Andrew." "Who?" Sarah asked, looking at the stage with jealousy. "That billionaire. You know her." "That's my wife," Mark whispered, his voice cracking. On stage, Andrew tapped the microphone. "Good evening," she said. Her voice was smooth, confident, recognizing no one. "Thank you all for coming. A year ago, I stood in a graveyard in the rain, with nothing but $5,000 and a broken heart. Tonight, I stand here as the owner of a portfolio worth $700 million. The crowd gasped. Applause broke out. "But money," Andrew continued, raising a hand to silence them, "is easy to get. Loyalty, integrity, that is rare. I started this company to test the integrity of the people in this city, specifically, the integrity of those closest to me." She looked directly at Mark. The spotlight seemed to follow her gaze. "I found that some men will sell their soul for a retainer check," Andrew said, her voice dropping an octave. "I found that some lawyers will betray their own partners for a glimpse of power, and I found that sometimes the liability you throw away is actually the bank." Mark felt like he was suffocating. She was talking about him. The shipping deal, the rent hike. He had done those things for her company, thinking he was serving a stranger. He had destroyed his own boss for her. Andrew smiled, a cruel, beautiful smile. "Please enjoy the champagne. It's vintage, just like the revenge." She turned and walked off the stage. Pandemonium erupted. "Mark! Mark, wait!" Sarah was grabbing his arm, but Mark shook her off. He was running on adrenaline and panic. He pushed through the crowd, ignoring the angry glare of his boss, Arthur. He had to get to her. He had to get to Andrew. "She's rich," his mind screamed. "She's worth hundreds of millions, and we're still legally married. I never signed the final decree. Wait, did I? No, the cooling off period. I can still fix this." He reached the VIP section, blocked by 2 massive security guards. "Get out of my way," Mark yelled. "That is my wife. I have a right to see her." "Let him in," a voice called from inside. The guard stepped aside. Mark stumbled into a private lounge. Andrew was sitting on a velvet sofa, sipping water. Harrison Thorne stood behind her like a sentinel. Andrew didn't stand up. She looked at him over the rim of her glass. "Hello, Mark. You look sweaty. Is the tuxedo a rental?" Andrew, Mark panted, falling to his knees in front of her. Andrew, oh my God, why didn't you tell me? Why did you hide this? Would it have mattered? Andrew asked coolly. If I had told you at the funeral, would you have stayed? Or would you have stayed for the money? I would have stayed because you're my wife, Mark lied, reaching for her hand. Andrew pulled it away as if he were diseased. We're not married, Mark, she said. The divorce was finalized 3 months ago. You were so busy with the Aurelius work that you didn't even read the final decree notification sent to your office. You let it default. We can get remarried, Mark pleaded. He looked pathetic. The arrogance was gone, replaced by naked greed. We have a child, a daughter. I want to be a father, Andrew. I want to be a family. Andrew laughed. It was a dark sound. Harrison, she said, show him. Harrison stepped forward and dropped a thick file onto the table. What is this? Mark asked. This, Harrison said, is a compilation of every email, every contract, and every transaction you facilitated for the Aurelius Group over the last 6 months. It details how you knowingly acted against the interests of your employer, Slightly and Associates. It proves you violated your fiduciary duty. It proves you committed legal malpractice and fraud. Mark went pale. You hired me to do that. You tricked me. I offered you a rope, Andrew corrected. You chose to hang yourself with it. You didn't have to take the shipping case. You didn't have to screw over your boss on the rent deal. You did it for the money. You did it because you have no moral compass. The door to the VIP lounge banged open. Arthur Blackwood stormed in, followed by Sarah. There you are, Arthur roared at Mark. I just spoke to Mr. Thorne's associate outside. Is it true? Did you represent the company that was attacking our firm? Did you double-cross me, Mark? Mark scrambled up, looking between Andrew and Arthur. Arthur, please, let me explain. It was a set-up. She set me up. He took the checks, Mr. Blackwood, Harrison said calmly. 50,000 a month, deposited directly into an account he shares with your daughter. Arthur turned purple. He looked at Mark with pure disgust. You are fired. Get out of my sight. I will have your license revoked by morning. You will never practice law in this state again. Arthur, wait! Mark cried. He turned to Sarah. Sarah, baby, tell him! We're a team! Sarah looked at Mark. She looked at his sweating face, his desperation. Then she looked at Andrew, sitting there like a queen in diamonds. Sarah did the math. Mark was fired. He was about to be disbarred. He was broke. Don't touch me, Sarah sneered, stepping back. You're a loser, Mark. I told you I needed a winner. I'm going home with Daddy. Sarah turned and walked out. Arthur followed, stopping only to spit on the floor near Mark's shoes. Mark was alone. He stood in the center of the room, his life incinerated in the span of 5 minutes. He had lost his job, his career, his mistress, and his status. He turned slowly to Andrew. You ruined me, he whispered. You planned this. You evil. I didn't ruin you, Mark, Andrew said, standing up finally. She towered over him in her heels. I just let you be yourself. She picked up her clutch. Oh, and one last thing, she said, stopping at the door. The penthouse? Aurelius bought the mortgage note last week. We're foreclosing. You have 24 hours to vacate. I'd suggest you start packing. It's going to rain tomorrow. Andrew walked out, Harrison following close behind. Mark Sterling collapsed onto the velvet sofa, burying his face in his hands. Outside, the applause for the chairwoman continued, loud and thunderous. The slide from the penthouse to the pavement wasn't a free-fall. It was a grinding, agonizing descent that stripped Mark Sterling of every layer of his identity. It started the morning after the gala. The foreclosure notice on the penthouse door was neon orange, a garish scream against the expensive mahogany wood. Mark stood there in his hallway, surrounded by half-packed boxes, realizing that the silence of the apartment was the sound of his life collapsing. He had tried to fight, of course. He was a lawyer. He knew how to file motions, how to delay, how to bluff. But he wasn't fighting a bank. He was fighting the Aurelius Group. Every motion he filed was met within an hour by a team of 10 attorneys who buried him in paperwork he couldn't afford to read, let alone answer. Then came the disbarment hearing. It was the final nail in the coffin. Slightly and Associates didn't just fire him, they crucified him. The evidence Harrison Thorne had compiled, the emails, the secret accounts, the conflicts of interest, was irrefutable. Mark stood before the ethics board, a man who once wore $3,000 suits, now wearing a wrinkled shirt because he couldn't afford the dry cleaner. When the gavel came down, revoking his license, it sounded like a gunshot. He sold the Porsche, then the Rolex, then the Italian leather furniture. He moved from the penthouse to a condo, then to an apartment, and finally to a basement studio in South Seattle that smelled perpetually of damp concrete and mildew. Mark Sterling, the man who had divorced his wife because she was a liability, had become the very thing he despised. A failure. 5 years later, November in Seattle is unforgiving. The rain is cold, constant, and seeps into the bones. Mark stood in the loading bay of Pete's Auto Parts, shivering in a blue windbreaker that was 2 sizes too small. He was 40 years old, but he looked 55. His hair had thinned to a wispy retreat, and his face was puffy from a diet of instant noodles and cheap beer. The sharp, predatory glint in his eyes was gone, replaced by a dull, watery haze of resentment. "Sterling, move it!" Mark flinched. His manager, a 24-year-old kid named Kyle with a neck tattoo and an attitude problem, leaned out the door. "The inventory count on the brake pads is off again." Kyle spat, chewing on a toothpick. "You can't even count to 10, old man. Fix it, or don't bother coming in tomorrow." "I'm on my lunch break, Kyle," Mark muttered, clutching a styrofoam cup of lukewarm coffee. "I don't care. You're lucky I hired you with your record. Now get to work." Kyle slammed the door. Mark stood alone in the cold, staring at the grey asphalt. He remembered a time when junior associates trembled when he walked into a room. Now, he was being bullied by a kid who hadn't even finished community college. He turned on the small portable radio he kept on the loading dock. He needed noise to drown out his thoughts. Mark froze. The coffee cup slipped from his hand, splashing onto his worn-out sneakers. Vance Sterling. The name echoed in his head like a church bell. She had kept his name. His heart began to hammer against his ribs, a frantic, desperate rhythm. Why would Andrew name $100 million building Sterling? She hated him. She had destroyed him. Unless she didn't hate him anymore. Hope is a dangerous thing for a desperate man. In Mark's mind, starved for affection and status, the logic twisted. It's been 5 years, he thought. Maybe the anger has faded. Maybe she realizes that a child needs a father. Maybe she kept the name because, deep down, she misses the family we were supposed to be. He looked down at his grease-stained hands. "She kept the name," he whispered. He didn't think. He didn't plan. He just reacted. He ripped off the blue windbreaker and threw it into the dumpster. He walked out of the loading bay, ignoring Kyle's shouting from the office window. He had to get to First Hill. The pilgrimage. He didn't have a car, and he didn't have Uber money. He took 2 buses, sitting in the back, squeezed between a teenager with a boombox and a woman with wet grocery bags. Mark stared at his reflection in the dark window. He tried to smooth his hair down with spit. He buttoned his cheap polyester shirt all the way to the top, trying to look respectable. "I look rough," he admitted to himself. "But Andrew will understand. She knows what it's like to be down. She was poor once. She'll see that I've paid my penance." By the time he arrived at the hospital, the rain had intensified into a deluge. The scene was dazzling. Massive spotlights swept the night sky. A white tent covered a red carpet that led to the gleaming glass entrance of the new wing. A line of black limousines and SUVs idled at the curb, their taillights glowing red in the mist. Mark stood on the sidewalk, shivering. He was soaked to the bone. The water plastered his thin shirt to his skin, making him look skeletal. He pushed his way through the crowd of onlookers gathered behind the velvet ropes. He saw faces he recognized from his old life. Judges, CEOs, socialites. They walked past him without a glance, their eyes sliding over him as if he were part of the scenery, just another homeless man in the city. "Ladies and gentlemen," a voice boomed over the speakers, "please welcome the benefactor of this new center, Ms. Andrew Vance." The crowd applauded. The door of the lead limousine opened. Mark held his breath. Andrew stepped out. Time had not just been kind to her, it had worshipped her. She wore a cream-colored trench coat, tailored to perfection, cinched at the waist to show off a silhouette that was both elegant and commanding. Her hair was loose, falling in soft, dark waves around her shoulders. She radiated a calm, untouchable power. But she wasn't alone. Holding her hand was a little girl. Mark felt the air leave his lungs. The girl was 5 years old. She had blonde curls that bounced as she walked, and bright, curious blue eyes. She was dressed in a navy peacoat with shiny gold buttons. She looked like an angel. Victoria. Mark's knees went weak. That was his daughter, the child he had called a liability, the child he had refused to visit. She was right there, 50 feet away. "Andrew!" Mark shouted. His voice was hoarse, cracking under the strain. The rain swallowed the sound. Andrew was smiling at the photographers, guiding Victoria toward the podium. "Andrew, it's Mark!" He lunged forward. He ducked under the velvet rope, stumbling onto the red carpet. "Hey, back off!" A security guard, a massive man with an earpiece, moved with terrifying speed. He grabbed Mark by the shoulder and shoved him back. "Get off me!" Mark screamed, thrashing against the guard's grip. "That is my wife! That is my daughter! Andrew, look at me!" The commotion rippled through the orderly event. The photographers turned their lenses away from the ribbon cutting and toward the struggle. Flashbulbs popped, blinding Mark. Andrew stopped. She didn't flinch. She simply paused, her hand tightening protectively on Victoria's shoulder. She turned slowly. The silence that fell over the entrance was heavy. The only sound was the hissing of the rain and Mark's ragged, desperate breathing. "Andrew!" Mark gasped, water dripping from his nose. "I saw the sign, Vance Sterling. You kept my name." Andrew looked at him. Her expression was unreadable. It wasn't angry. It wasn't sad. It was the polite, distant expression one might give to a stranger who had just interrupted a dinner conversation. She took a few steps closer, pulling Victoria with her. Harrison Thorne, faithful as ever, stepped up beside her, holding a large black umbrella over them. "I didn't keep the name for you, Mark," Andrew said softly. Her voice was calm, carrying effortlessly in the quiet air. "I kept it because it belongs to her." She looked down at Victoria. "She is a Sterling. It is her birthright. You gave her that name, and then you gave her nothing else." "I can change that," Mark pleaded, reaching out a trembling hand. "I've changed, Andrew. Look at me. I've lost everything. I'm working at an auto parts store. I'm living in a basement. I've paid for what I did. Please, just let me see her. Let me be a father." Victoria hid behind Andrew's coat, peeking out at the wet, shouting man. "Mommy? Who is that?" she asked. Her voice was small, innocent, and terrified. Mark's heart stopped. "Tell her," he prayed. "Tell her I'm her daddy. Tell her I'm sorry." Andrew knelt down on the red carpet, ignoring the dampness on her expensive coat. She didn't look at Mark, she looked only at her daughter. She smoothed a curl away from Victoria's forehead with a gentle hand. "Do you remember I told you that sometimes people make bad choices?" Andrew asked the child. Victoria nodded. "And do you remember I told you that sometimes we have to let go of things that hurt us, so we can make room for things that make us happy?" "Yes, Mummy." Andrew stood up. She looked at Mark one last time. Her eyes were clear, dry, and utterly final. There was no hate left in them, only a vast, empty indifference. "That man," Andrew said to her daughter, "is a ghost from a very old story. He's nobody we know." Mark felt his soul shatter. "Nobody we know." "Harrison," Andrew said, turning away. "Let's go inside. It's cold out here." "Andrew, no!" Mark screamed. The security guard shoved him back, hard. Mark stumbled, his feet slipping on the wet pavement. He fell onto the concrete, scraping his palms raw. He looked up from the ground. The glass doors of the Vance Sterling Pediatric Center were sliding open. Warm, golden light spilled out, illuminating the rain like a beacon of heaven he was forbidden to enter. He watched as Andrew and Victoria walked into the light. Victoria didn't look back. The doors slid shut. The final mercy. The crowd began to disperse, uncomfortable with the scene they had just witnessed. The paparazzi checked their photos, realizing the crazy guy wasn't worth the headline, and moved on. Mark stayed on the ground, the water soaked through his pants, chilling him to the marrow. He was shivering so violently his teeth chattered. He had expected anger. He could have fought against anger. Anger meant he still mattered. But indifference? Being erased from his own daughter's history? That was a wound that would never heal. He heard the click of polished shoes on the pavement. He looked up. Harrison Thorne was standing over him. The old lawyer looked down with a gaze that wasn't unkind, but it was devoid of pity. It was the look of a man who balances ledgers. "Mr. Sterling," Harrison said. She named the building after me," Mark mumbled, delusional to the bitter end. "She named it after the daughter she raised alone," Harrison corrected. "You were merely the biological necessity. A transaction." Harrison reached into his breast pocket. He pulled out a leather wallet. Mark watched, mesmerizingly. Was he going to offer him a check? A settlement? $10,000 to go away? Harrison pulled out a single bill. He bent down and tucked it into the pocket of Mark's soaked, grease-stained shirt. What is this?" Mark whispered. $5, Harrison said. "Bus fare." Andrew mentioned that she remembered the day you left her at the cemetery. You left her $5,000 to start a new life. Since you are now worth approximately 1,000th of the man you were then, the math seemed appropriate. Harrison straightened his coat. "Do not come back, Mr. Sterling. The next time, the security won't be so gentle." Harrison turned and walked toward the hospital entrance, the umbrella shielding him from the storm. Mark sat alone, in the rain. He reached into his pocket and pulled out the bill. A crumpled $5 bill. Lincoln's face stared back at him. He looked at the towering glass building, glowing with warmth and life. He looked at the name Vance Sterling, etched in steel above the door. It was a monument to the family he had created, and the family he had thrown away for a promotion that never came. He tried to stand up, but his legs were heavy. He was cold. He was so incredibly cold. Mark laughed. It was a broken, jagged sound that turned into a sob. He curled in on himself on the wet pavement, clutching the $5 to his chest as the Seattle rain washed over him, cleansing the street of the dirt, the grime, and the ghosts. And that is the tragic, satisfying reality of karma. Mark thought he could discard a human being like trash because she didn't fit his aesthetic, only to find out that she held the keys to the very kingdom he was desperate to enter. He spent his life chasing gold, but in his greed, he threw away the diamond. What do you think? Did Mark deserve to be completely cut out of his daughter's life, or was Andrew too harsh in the end? I want to hear your thoughts in the comments below. I read every single one. If you enjoyed this story of betrayal and ultimate justice, please smash that like button. It really helps the channel grow. And don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell icon so you never miss a story. Thanks for watching.